which is continuing on the carbohydrates. This time we're looking at sugar and sweeteners. So again, coming from a blood sugar level perspective, we kind of want to be minimizing on any kind of sweetening aspects that come into the body. And the main reason for that is because sweeteners and sugars and things like that have a tendency to stimulate the nervous system, but also raise blood sugar levels. And as we mentioned previously, raising blood sugar levels can cause problems for a lot of people, in particular when they've got other conditions that are playing up, such as your diabetes or insulin resistance. One of the problems with having high blood sugar levels is that it increases and contributes to inflammation significantly. So when we do have inflammation in the body, any way that we can try to minimize it is obviously going to be an ideal situation. So here we're going to look at sweeteners that, essentially going to have an impact on the body in some way or another. But the reality is we all use sweeteners at some point in time. And so what we want to do is we want to look at those sweeteners that will support the body perhaps a little bit more rather than those that tend to kind of not support it so much. So again, if we look here at the table that we've got, so we're dealing with sweeteners that are less impacting on the body, and then we've got other sweeteners. So the reality is that we've got stevia and vanilla powder on the left-hand side. So stevia is obviously predominantly one that you can find these days as a synthetic sweetener, but it is copied off the stevia plant. So stevia plant, if you can source that one, it's the leaves, and if you chew on the leaves, it's actually quite sweet. So you can purchase stevia drops or pills or powder, and usually you only need much, much smaller amounts to be able to sweeten things. The downside, it can have a little bit of a sort of a funny taste or a bit of a chemical taste to it. That's what some people find, and particularly with the cheaper brands, they'll have that chemical side taste to it. Some of the better ones, the organic ones, don't tend to have it as strongly. So experiment with this if you're interested in trying them out. Be aware that for some people they're quite sensitive and they may react to stevia as well. They may not find it suits them, but it is one of those that tends not to impact on blood sugar levels as directly as other sweeteners. Vanilla powder, obviously, or pods, is a really lovely natural way of bringing a little bit of a flavor and a sweetness to certain foods. Obviously, it's something that's very, very expensive to get if you're getting the real vanilla powder. We're not talking about the copies of vanilla powder or the vanilla sort of sugar that you can buy sometimes in supermarkets, which is the sweet version of it, which is basically pure sugar in there. So what we're dealing with is the pure, genuine vanilla powder or pods that have been ground up. And they are expensive to get a hold of. I think originally the vanilla was purchased or brought in from Madagascar. And a lot of the vanilla orchid farms in Madagascar have now burned down and have been lost. So there's Indonesian vanilla and a couple of other places where you can source vanilla from, but because it's kind of hard to source, then it has gone up hugely in price in the last couple of years. We're talking, a couple of $100 for, a couple of 100 grams. So it's very, very expensive. So vanilla still remains as one of those, it's a natural way of slightly sweetening and flavoring your foods, and it doesn't tend to affect the blood sugar levels. Obviously, it's important to feel whether that suits your body or not. So yeah, the reality is that no sweeteners are great for the body. The reality is as well that we still use them. So we've got other sweeteners here on the right-hand side of the column here. And obviously sugar, your white, your raw, your rapadura, even your coconut sugar and your xylitol are going to impact on blood sugar levels. When you go for things like your coconut sugar and your xylitol, they tend to have a little bit less of an impact than your white or raw sugar, but they still, are usable in recipes in smaller amounts too. And in particular, coconut sugar and xylitol can be used in much, much lesser amounts than your normal recipe would call for. So it's an advantage, obviously, if you're going to be using sugars. And we've also got things like your blackstrap molasses, and then you've got your honey, your maple syrup, and your rice malt syrup. So in regards to these, honey is actually a beautiful, beautiful sweetener to use because it's rich in lots of really beautiful nutrients. So definitely honey is one of my favorites, same as maple syrup, and two of my favorites to use in cooking as a substitute for sugar. But just do keep in mind that they do stimulate and raise blood sugar levels. So if that's your aim to try to minimize it, then minimize your blood sugar level stimulation, then you obviously need to minimize on the honey and the maple syrup as well. Rice malt syrup is also a great alternative for a lot of people in terms of it being a low fructose sweetener. So it suits some people better than others. It's not super, super sweet, but it does have its sweetness. So you can add this to recipes as a substitute for, say, honey or maple syrup or sugar, even if you wanted to. Again, a lot of the recipes about playing with these ingredients and seeing what works best. Have a look on our website to get some ideas about the recipes as well, and how to use different sweeteners for them. So that wraps this section up, keeping in mind, obviously, we're coming from a perspective where we really want to support the blood sugar levels in the body, because it can lead to so many issues for a lot of people. And in addition to that, just from a general energy perspective, blood sugar levels, when they're bumped up by something like your sweeteners, like these things, they'll rise up really quickly and they'll drop again really quickly. And so what happens is you get this boost of energy, you've got lots of energy, but then you get this dull and drop, you get this drop that happens, which means that you actually have very little energy. So it's a common sort of yo-yo reaction to be in, and then you get sort of sucked into this dependency of having to have a sweetener or something sweet all the time to be able to lift you up and perk you up constantly. It's one of the challenges of working with sugar. So obviously cutting sugar out completely from your diet is a very interesting experience. All right, so let's now move on to the next section of carbohydrates.